What's up, guys? Kyle here with Matt this week, taking kind of a little bit of a break from what we normally do. We had previously done every 5 episodes we do with the coach. I messed up and didn't schedule anybody for this week, so we're doing one early with the coaches. Logan couldn't be on the call today. It's kind of last minute, so Matt and I have been chatting a little bit on Wednesday about training and some of the projects that we're working on. So we're going to try and kind of have that conversation on a Zoom call this week, or on our podcast this week. The topic we're going to kind of chat a little bit about is bigger, powerful CrossFit athletes. We say powerful CrossFit athletes because in reality, if you're a CrossFit athlete, you're probably not that powerful in regards to field sports, but you're probably a little bit more powerful than the average CrossFitter. So we're both Matt and I kind of fit this profile. So we've also been doing some training this year where we've kind of been directing our own training, and we'll kind of get into what we've been doing in that later on inside the podcast. So Matt, you have anything else you kind of want to add there? Or?
The being powerful in this sport relative to other sports, being powerful in general can bite you in the butt in CrossFit.
Yeah. It's definitely. I'm sure everybody's seen it in the gym where they have like the guy who can clean or the girl who can clean, 250 plus, or the guy who can clean 350 plus, and all of a sudden they get into a workout and 10 or 15 burpees in, they're like hands and knees gasping for breath. So it's definitely not the endurance side of the sport. So that's kind of like what we're looking at developing, is a little bit more of the endurance side of the sport. So first thing we want to kind of do is define what the sport is. And we're kind of chatting about what the actual sport measures. And when we look at the sport, we have, do you remember, was it the equation, Matt, that they use? The work divided by time equals
force times distance over time, which in this case, force is in most cases, or one of the factors in the force is body weight.
Yeah. So
being bigger and being longer means you have to do more work,
right,
just to complete the same amount of reps. And in the sport, this was best shown. I think it was WOD Science when they broke down Mary from the games year ago.
I was trying to think of that workout. I said like Nate to somebody. I was like totally not even close. But Mary. Yeah. So
correct on that one. It was like Brent Fikowski doing 15 rounds is the equivalent of Noah Olson doing 20, something like that.
Yeah, if you're measuring out actual power output. Yeah. So with that equation, guys, force times
distance over time.
Yeah. Is kind of like what the staple of CrossFit was, but what they're using to measure that is just a time component for most of their workouts. They're totally negating, or the sport kind of totally negates the force component of it, like Matt was talking about there. So kind of like Matt had just mentioned, body weight comes into play, levers come into play. And so if you're looking, and he used the example of Fikowski and Noah in Mary last year. And I think too, like Fitness Analytics, the Instagram page, did a breakdown of it as well. And like per pull-up rep, based off of body weight and lever length, because Brent, I think, had to pull like 2 or 3 more inches on each pull-up rep. So like for one pull-up, Brent was doing like 1.5 times or 1.15 times the amount of work that Noah was doing each rep. So it was like so there's a huge comparison difference inside of power output inside of the sport. So keep that in mind as we kind of run through the rest of the stuff here, guys. That's going to come into play a little bit later. The next thing we wanted to kind of break down is the high volume nature of the sport. And Matt kind of touched on this as well. And Matt's actually training in this a little bit more. So he'll kind of chat a little bit more about this coming up here. But the high volume nature of the sport. So if we look at something like Mary, how many, Noah did 20 plus rounds. Noah and Matt did 20 plus rounds on that workout.
Yep.
Yeah, so they're putting in 300 upper body pulling contractions inside that workout alone, and I can't remember the exact workouts after that, but I know they had more upper body pulling contractions later on that weekend because that was only workout number 5, that was on Friday. Yeah. So if they hadn't already had more upper body pulling contractions previously to that, I think they definitely had some coming up in the weekend. So the nature of the sport, especially at the highest level, and when you get into 3-day competitions, is just very volume oriented. So there's a lot of contraction going on. So what are your thoughts on that, Matt, volume wise?
Oh yeah, it's a high volume sport, especially if you're looking at a multi-day competition. And even if you're just looking at the open 1 day a week, if you're only doing it each individual open workout for the most part are higher volume workouts.
Mm-hmm. Have you had anybody that you've coached or seen anybody retest the open workout every day that they can retest the open workout, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday?
I've never seen that. I've only seen doing the same one twice in the same day.
Yeah, I've seen that too, which is really impressive for bigger, especially for bigger athletes.
I did that in 2015, the handstand push-up workout.
You did that in 2015? Yeah, that was the power cleans and handstand push-ups, right? Right on. Yeah, good. I definitely could not do that. So, and then last component we wanted to touch on here is that force component. We're touching on that a little bit more. So, to give you guys a little bit more of kind of an idea on that is, Max Aida has a podcast, and I can't remember who the co-host is for the life of me on that one. Do you remember or no?
Is it Chad or no?
Man, I can't remember. Sorry. But they hooked a device. I think it was a forceometer or something like that. I could be totally wrong on that. But basically it measures how much force you're putting into a barbell. So it'll hook up to a barbell. It'll measure it at the top of the rep. It'll measure it, and then it'll measure it when it gets back up to the top of the rep. And you can basically measure how much force you're putting into a barbell or velocity when you're putting into a barbell, which you can calculate force out of. And so what they found was this guy is 6 feet tall or just north of 6 feet tall. And they both back squatted 70%, and he was with another athlete that was a little bit shorter than him. I think he was maybe 5'7", 5'8", somewhere around there. And they both back squatted relatively 70% of their 1 RM. And the taller athlete was putting way more force into his reps at his 70% of 1 RM relative to the shorter athlete because of the distance that he had to move the bar. So if you guys take a look at a squat, taller athlete versus shorter athlete, normally the taller athlete is moving the barbell about 2 to 3, or obviously it varies, but they're moving it a little bit more on the top end and the bottom end of each rep. So they have a little bit more distance to travel, which is going to create a little bit more force that they're going to have to put into said movement. And so this kind of transfers over to like body weight movements in the sport that we were talking about. Also transfers over into lower weight movements in the sport. So like lightweight power snatches, lightweight thrusters. So you're not getting your cycle speed to match a smaller athlete has to be a little bit faster. And so you're going to have to work just quite a bit harder. So
significantly harder.
Say again.
Significantly harder.
Yeah.
You're moving faster, and you have more body weight, and you have a further distance.
Yep. So more muscle does not always equate to positive benefits in performance, especially for CrossFit. So dudes that are looking to get huge out there, maybe think twice if you're looking to also perform in CrossFit.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the components that we want to touch on of the sport. The fact that it doesn't necessarily measure power output, it mostly measures time. The fact that, or the higher volume nature of the sport. And then the fact that taller athletes are going to have to put in a little bit more force to be relatively or relative inside of the sport. And so we'll kind of touch on the volume component here, because Matt's been doing some pretty long pieces in his training. So Matt, you want to just kind of break down what you've been doing, break down like your athlete profile, and then break down kind of what you've been doing for the last couple of months here.
Yeah. I just want to really quickly touch on the force of the bigger versus the athlete. So an example there. So also in 2015, that final workout in the open, thrusters and rowing.
Yeah.
So I did that workout. I did that workout unbroken, and like there wasn't the pause at the top thrusters. That bar was moving the whole time, and I was rowing at least 1,800 calories an hour. And there's videos out there where like guys are pulling like 1,400 calories an hour, and they smoked me by like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And I took one of these athletes, knowing their height, and gave a rough estimate, a generous estimate on arm length. So generous in that I was underestimating it. And my barbell traveled at least 200 more feet than theirs. So yes, we both did thrusters. Yes, we did the same number of calories, but the amount of work that was accomplished in that time period varies a lot bigger to smaller athletes, not only in body weight, but also in limb length.
Yeah.
So if you're going to be a bigger athlete in the sport, it's something you need to accept.
Yep.
And start figuring out strategies for how to deal with it.
Right. Which we're going to get into now.
Exactly what we're going to dive into. I've been CrossFitting for, in 7 days, I'll come up on my 10-year anniversary.
Congratulations.
So within 3 months, I think I took my back squat from 200 to 330, and then another 3 months, 365.
Yeah.
So strength happened instantly. I had decent aerobic base, but so the strength went up, but no matter what I would do, I'd blow up. And part of that
feeling too
would cause that little bit of blood flow restriction. So I was getting basically hypertrophy work the entire time I was in CrossFit.
Can you describe kind of that blowing up feeling really quick?
Like for me, it's usually something around my either quads or my armpits, where like it's a really locked up muscle, and then everything out from that locked up muscle is not getting much blood.
Yeah. So essentially it's like a really big pump that you get.
Yeah, giant pump in the middle of your workout, which doesn't necessarily help. So the nature of all of that, it became, I just needed to learn to suffer.
Yeah.
There's the 30-minute bike calorie, max calorie test. And I think the last time I tested it was like 565 calories, and it was 28 minutes of feeling like my legs were being stabbed and they were on fire. And it was just, okay, we're just going to suffer for a very long time.
This is also because I beat Matt by like 9 meters on a 30-minute row, and then he came back and beat me by 2 calories on a 30-minute assault bike. So motivation definitely plays a factor into suffering.
Yes. So my competitive CrossFit career was just move as well as you can, breathe as well as you can, but you're going to suffer, and you're just going to suffer for a while.
Yep.
Suffer in the metabolic sense.
Yeah.
And past few years, I switched directions, and my coaching had become my focus. So training had taken a back seat. So I've recently gotten back into it, and I decided I want to see if I can not suffer.
Yeah.
And it's been low and slow approach. So there's for cardiovascular limitation athletes, which typically your bigger, powerful athletes tend to be delivery limited.
Yep.
It was all right. Sorry?
Do you mind if I jump in? Just to give a reminder of that is like the heart is having issues delivering oxygen or blood to the working tissues. So powerful athletes, this tends to be the case because they have a little bit more fast twitch muscle fiber as a easier way of saying this. So they're going to create a little bit more restriction, and the heart has to work a little bit harder to break through that restriction from the muscles tensing up as they're creating faster turnovers for those reps. So that's kind of the occlusion that Matt's talking about there. Sorry.
No, that's perfect. So Kyle and me have been chatting, and one of the things he was mentioning was that in cyclical sports, one approach that they would do is they would like go hard for a minute and then 4 minutes easy. Mm-hmm. So I took that and I'm like, all right, let's make the minute hard, CrossFit specific. So rather than just hitting the machine hard, let's make it CrossFit specific and then easy on the machine after that. So that rough work to rest ratio of a 1-to-4 has been kind of a guiding principle throughout. So and I've started to apply it to everything. So it's been EMOMs of, I've been doing a boatload of strict work, strict pull-ups, handstand and push-ups. And when I say boatload, I mean, I'll do a 30-minute EMOM where I'm doing 4 strict handstand push-ups and an easy bike for the remainder, which typically is about 50 to 60 calories, depending on the day and how everything's going. So only a few calories, and just hammering that volume. So 100 plus handstand push-ups, 100 plus pull-ups, 50 plus dips, 200 plus squats, 200 plus burpees has been just kind of the norm. And it's hitting it in a way where I'm elevating my heart rate in the process, but I'm not blowing up in that traditional sense of that blood flow restriction and that occlusion, or I'm trying to minimize it, and I'll adjust my training if that happens to happen.
Yeah. So you've been keeping like the rep scheme a little bit lower, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And even in the middle of the workout, I will adjust it if I start to lose the stimulus. So
okay.
I have an adaptation in mind. I have some ideas of how to accomplish it, and I will not hesitate to adjust whatever I have written down on a piece of paper to make sure that I am creating the right adaptation.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that like is the biggest premise behind that is you're trying to avoid creating the occlusion to avoid hypertrophy and essentially getting bigger in the sport. Is that correct? Or
Yep. That's one of the big guiding principles here.
Yeah. Because so back to the faster twitch muscle fibers tightening down, like creates lactate inside the muscle, and lactate drives what are called metabolites. Metabolites send a signaling to hypertrophy. And so for bigger athletes that have a little bit more fast twitch dominant fibers, you just kind of get big and you end up at 240 pounds one day and you're like, how did I get this big? This sucks. So yeah, the goal for it sounds like is to just make sure that you're not feeling any of that tight restriction inside of your training.
Yes. Yep. And with it, so I also a boatload of strict muscle ups, and every so often I'll throw in an old tester. So
okay,
I had only been doing cyclical machines and strict muscle ups, and I PR'd my 30 ring muscle ups for time. First time I tried kipping ring muscle ups.
Since you came back, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And it was like 30 seconds.
That was a lifetime PR when I tested that.
Yeah. Sick.
Yeah. The past 5-6 months, all I've been doing is strict work and machine work, and PR'd 30 kipping muscle ups for time. So boatload of machine work. There's a old workout Kyle gave me, which was it was to work on the delivery system, which was it was 20 seconds at 300 watts on the bike, 20 seconds at 500, and 20 seconds at 700. So building in intensity, and then 1 minute break. And I retested. I did that workout again. I hadn't done it in years, and it was easy. Like I got to it was just I ran out of time and I had to go train clients rather than hitting that limitation. So
yeah.
And with all this machine work, I'd say I'm averaging 500 plus calories a day. There's a few days where I'll get to 800 calories on the machines, and it's just low and slow for the most part. And occasionally I'll play with a little bit of intensity, but for the most part, low and slow. With my athlete type 2, I can drive up my nervous system, so I can drive up my strength relatively quickly.
Yeah.
So I am, for the most part, avoiding strength work. I'll hit a strength aspect a little bit once every 2 weeks or so, just for a little bit of maintenance. But also, this is an experiment, and I can drive that strength back up as quickly in another 6 months or a year when I start shifting back towards the sport.
Yeah. Because your goal is 35 plus right now, correct?
Well, it was just, based on what's out there, it seemed like it would take about 2 years to try and make a shift in athlete type. So I'll be 33, 34 about the time that happens. So have a little bit of fun while I can still play with the young guns, and then I'll be a Masters. Yeah.
Yeah. So just speaking from experience too, like I had a guy who's pretty powerful, and like whenever we needed to get him strong, I've used some of these training principles on him, but whenever we need to get him strong, like prior to or boost, give him a little bit of a confidence boost, we'd literally put him through a 2-week strength cycle, literally 2 weeks, and he was touching like lifetime numbers again. So it was pretty crazy how fast like you do all the aerobic work and like you kind of feel weaker, but once your central nervous system gets those touches again, like you're ready to rock as a more powerful athlete in the sport. So so that's kind of how you've been tackling I guess kind of two components there that we had chatted about, but more so the volume component of the sport is just kind of longer, slower distances without creating a ton of occlusion or blood flow restriction. Yeah. So that's kind of the idea behind the higher volume nature of the sport. So being able to sustain the high forces of the sport throughout like a 3-day, 4-day event. The other thing that this is kind of doing, so with we kind of mentioned how more powerful athletes have to work a little bit faster than taller athletes have to work a little bit faster than shorter athletes to keep the same rep ranges. So with this, they're going to have overly developed aerobic systems so that if you look at the nature of the sport, you're moving from implement to implement inside of a live competition. You're moving from implement to implement, and there's a pretty long transition times, or can be longer transition times. And that is just time for us to rest and work on recovering our aerobic system. So for a more for a taller athlete, they're going to have a little bit more of a developed aerobic system so that they can recover during those transition bouts inside of live competition events, as well as keep their higher paces or higher cadences a little bit more aerobic, or recover a little bit faster between their work and rest sets. Is that kind of like the same thought process you have there, Matt, on that? Or
that I want my aerobic system to be absolutely developed as much as it can. And just 5 or so months into this, like, my body's feeling the best it ever has doing CrossFit. With the strict work, I'm also movement quality is also a big piece here. So I'm moving well, I'm keeping it strict, and my aerobic system feels about as good as it ever has. I don't know if if I did a 30-minute bike test, I don't know if I could suffer the same way right now. And that's
right.
something that I'm interested in either. So I don't know if I could beat that score, but if I had to do that test and then go do something else, I would be in a much, much better place to hit another piece and another piece.
Yeah. So there is a suffering component that does come into the sport that you do kind of need to train a little bit. But the higher we can drive up that aerobic system, and this kind of goes for any athlete in the sport, the better we're going to be able to, one, recover from training, and two, the more intensity we're going to be able to put into training when we need to put it into training. So later on down the road, like when Matt's prepping for competitions, or he'll be able to handle his intensity and suffering pieces a little bit better without really fucking himself up and having constant nagging injuries, not sleeping, the works. So on the flip side, so just to touch on kind of like a little bit more traditional CrossFit athlete, the higher intensity stuff might actually, one, be a little bit more aerobic for them, because they aren't under tension as long. As well, we might actually want some of the hypertrophy effects that longer time under tension can drive, depending on the athlete profile. So if they need a little bit more strength work, we might want them to kind of suffer a little bit more in CrossFit workouts to get a little bit more of that metabolic response and hypertrophy a little bit more. So kind of the flip side, like of the training paradigm, I think is the word I'm looking for. I don't know if I said that right. But yeah. So what I've kind of been doing this last year is working a little bit more on my aerobic system from a cyclical standpoint. So I've been doing roughly 3 times a week, 60 minutes on machines. Probably averages out closer to a little bit more to 2.5. And then I've also actually been walking 4 miles a day. So so we take a look at kind of CrossFit, the sport as well. Like, we're seeing it's a little bit more of an aerobic power based sport. And in the endurance world, they have this 80-20 rule where 80% of your training is easy and lighter, and then 20% of your training is higher intensity. So that's kind of where my philosophy has come from this year is, and bring it back to that aerobic power state. Whenever you're driving your aerobic power or training in the aerobic power state, it's going to lower your aerobic system to where it's working solely in an aerobic power state. So you're going to accumulate lactate a little bit quicker. Your aerobic system is going to diminish, so the ability to recover from workouts, get constant blood flow, resting tension levels are going to rise. And just like intensity in general is gonna wreak havoc on your central nervous system, and potentially cause a lot of tissue injuries, which is one reason why I had to slow down big time in the sport, is my tissues hated me. But so I've been kind of taking this 80-20 approach where I'll still have intensity, and I'm touching those 3 times a week of that aerobic system work. And then I was going in for a while there doing a second kind of CrossFit session on a couple of my days. So I would do a CrossFit session or intervals on Monday. I would do another kind of CrossFit or strength session on Tuesday. Wednesday PM would be kind of strength and maybe another CrossFit, like jump in on a class workout or something like that. Friday was all CrossFit and Saturday was all CrossFit. So I'd usually do like an aerobic piece, CrossFit, and then on Friday, and then Saturday was just straight CrossFit. So quite a few like mixed sessions in there. And what I would do is a lot of times when you hear that 80-20 rule, you're like, oh, I'm going to have to take out things. And in reality, you get to add things in. And so basically what ended up happening is that CrossFit session acted as the intensity piece for the day. And then what I would do is go and walk 4 miles in the remainder of the day, or whatever kind of throughout the day. And that 4 miles would start to balance out kind of that 80-20 split, where it just drive more of my work towards that lower intensity and that 80% side of the coin. I have not tested anything yet, but I have been keeping up with some of our other athletes' scores inside of workouts, where probably about a year ago I wouldn't have even been close to some of these guys' scores. So just based on that alone, it appears to be working, and my body feels great right now. I've been, minus some foam rolling that I've needed to do, like I've been injury free, which is for the last year roughly, which is pretty abnormal for me. I used to like to go pretty hard. So that is like one takeaway that I've had is honestly, like the walking has been huge for me. But yeah, I don't, what have you kind of experienced any of that, Matt, or have you done any of the 80-20 stuff?
In the past 5-6 months, I think I've had 2, maybe 3 times where I've had to do a little bit of mobility work. Like I haven't touched a lacrosse, like I don't even warm up. Like I just jump into my emails because I'm like, I feel good. I'm moving well. I'm keeping my volume low. It's sustainable.
Yeah.
Just once or twice, like my triceps were a little bit still tight from 150 handstand push-ups and 75 ring dips, and then I'm trying to get into a front rack the next day, and things are a little bit tight. So I've had to mobilize those and open up my upper back, but beyond that, yeah, it's just been feeling good. Kyle, you were mentioning you're getting like your aerobic session in, and then you were getting your intensity piece. Did you notice like any carryover there, like where like you had that aerobic system primed, so you were breathing better, blood flow is happening more easily, like you just felt like you were more aerobic in the intensity piece than you normally are?
Yeah. So for me, like, trying to think of how to describe this. Yes. So short answer, yes. I was definitely more aerobic. A lot of my machine numbers I wasn't as powerful on them, but I was still able to sustain some paces on them. I did actually run a retest on that power snatch bar facing burpee workout. I can't remember, what was that 20.1?
Yeah.
Yeah. I PR'd that by almost 2 minutes in the middle of summer in a gym that's like 110 degrees, and I overheated on the 6th round. So I'm sure I could have gone a little bit faster on that. But what's that?
2 minutes is huge, even if it wasn't those conditions.
Yeah, I want to say it was, I could be I can't remember now. This is what you get for not writing down your score. So everyone that's not tracking results right now, fucking track your results. But yeah, I remember it was a PR, and everything felt much. It didn't feel like I was freaking out in a workout, and that's kind of the biggest limitation that I have. Is I start to freak out in workouts, and when I start to freak out, like breathing essentially becomes an issue. My neck gets tight, and so it's harder to get oxygen in, and then I begin to suffer. Cool, which I used to be really good at. So that was kind of like the biggest noticeable thing. And then the other big noticeable thing was I was just able to start putting in a lot more volume into my training. So I was able to bump toes to bar up to like 150 in a session, relatively easy. I was starting to work a lot of gymnastics components up into higher rep ranges. I think had a couple sessions where I did close to 150 upper body pulling sessions, and this is on a 230 pound frame. So it's not like my shoulders held up fine. And I was never messed up from the next day or anything like that. It was more, so those are kind of the bigger things that I noticed, was like the ability to sustain volume, and like the recovering from it, and just how on a day-to-day basis I felt better, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So in the workout itself, do you feel like you're moving better, or you feel like you're moving the same way you always have?
Yeah. Are you saying like from a movement
quality standpoint?
Yeah.
Do you think that changed at all?
If I worked on it more, it would have. I think my tissues aren't getting as tight, if that makes sense. But definitely if I had somebody that I could go to for like a massage or body work, I think I'd be moving a lot better in workouts. One thing I'm actually going to start trying to do here is shorten so as the season's getting closer, I'm going to shorten my aerobic sessions down to like 30 or 45 minutes and use them more as maintenance pieces. And season, I mean by the open. And then I'm going to try and start developing positions. So specifically in handstands, and working a little bit more on muscular endurance type stuff. So like holding handstands against the wall, holding parallel handstands, doing some mobility in between that type of stuff, and try and see how that plays out when it's like high volume handstand pushed up work, if that makes sense, high volume handstand walking. So yeah, so those are more of like the bigger benefits I've seen, is like the volume tolerance, and now I'll be able to kind of transfer that into intensity a little bit more. The other week I held, granted every assault bike is different, but I held 75 RPM on the assault bike for 5 minutes, doing very little sprint work on the assault bike. So some of the metrics are there. It's just like, now you just got to get used to it.
So with just feeling better, my thought process behind that is, if you're better composed and you're moving better and you're recovering better because of that aerobic system's in place, your mechanics aren't going to fall apart. So if you're moving better, you're not going to get as beat up. Also, you're doing all that aerobic work, so you're getting a boatload of fresh blood and nutrients into those tissues to help them recover. So you're moving better and you're recovering better. You're not as jacked up.
Yeah. And you had kind of mentioned that on one of our other calls, was like you can handle volume essentially until your position breaks down. And then like if your position breaks down, the next day you're like messed up. So that's probably where most people get, it's probably where Dom's partially comes from. Obviously that's like a pretty, still trying to figure that one out. That's definitely where like I know in the past that's where like tweaks and injuries have come from, is like overdoing a compromised position inside, and mostly it's like rotation on the deadlift that's gotten me. Has there been any like specific things that have gotten you on in the past?
Historically, right around my shoulder blades. I could never pinpoint it exactly, but it was just that upper back strength from handstand push-ups that would destroy me and like keep me up at night, and haven't had a problem with that. As you get into your handstand walks and you've built up the capacity, make sure you wear gloves. I did like my second handstand walk session in these 5 months last weekend, and I got at 720 feet into the session, like my hand is just blistered.
Oh, okay, good to know.
So like hand blisters are the limiter for high volume handstand walks.
Apparently, I've never experienced that before, but good to know.
That's healing up.
Oh yeah, look at that. Wow. Okay. But yeah, I think I do think my like ability to cycle and recover in between sets of cycling a barbell has improved a little bit, which is kind of like the limitation inside kind of like bigger athletes for the most part. My burpee speed has definitely like improved, and I can handle that a little bit higher. So that's kind of like that aerobic system, definitely like what we were talking about, is the aerobic system, just being able to handle some of the workload that you are and the force that you're having to put into workouts to get pretty good scores on the workout. So
I'm with you on the burpees too. I feel like I'm 160 pounds when I'm doing burpees now.
Yeah. It's like there's no resistance on them, which is nice. But yeah, so that's kind of like the three kind of areas that kind of are, I don't know if unfair is the right word, but like the kind of limitations that bigger athletes kind of face in the sport, or the obstacles. That's the word I was looking for, that bigger athletes kind of face in the sport. And so, yeah, so those are kind of the things that we're doing to work on combating those or training those. And I've definitely had some bigger clients in the sport, you being one of them, Matt, previously. And we've taken some of these principles, not to the extent that I think you and I are working on them right now.
We're doing a deep dive experiment to see what happens.
Yeah. But we've definitely have taken some of these principles and applied them to some of their training. It's a much more long-term approach to training, but we've like for the people who are able to gut it out and stick it out, they've seen some pretty big benefits, just in how healthy their body is and how long their sustainability in the sport and their performance in the sport as well. So, yeah. Do you have anything else you wanted to add there? Or?
Just on that aspect, like when you said gutting it out, like Kyle means gutting it out as in like you're on a machine for I'm probably spending at least 5 hours a week on a machine. Sounds like you're spending something similar, and like
yeah.
You have to find enjoyment in the monotony of that, and even within the monotony of it, you're at least I am. I'm like, all right, I'm working on my rowing technique then. Okay, let's try and hit this position. Let's try and tweak this little aspect. Okay, let's try and use a little bit more arm on the bike. So it's just, not only is it a boatload of cyclical work, it's a boatload of technique work, which better from the machine work now.
Yeah. And just from like a coach's standpoint as well, like not every athlete is going to be able to handle this. So like you might be hearing this and you're like, well, I don't want to have anything to do with that. And like, that's kind of our job to figure that out as well. And like, make sure that if you're able to handle this kind of training, it's probably going to be pretty successful for you. If you're kind of the athlete profile that Matt and myself are. But at the same time, like CrossFit is very fun, and some people just want to train CrossFit, and like you got to figure out ways to allow them to kind of express their capacity and enjoyment of the sport while still trying to develop things like this. And that's kind of where the fun of coaching comes in.
It can even be counterproductive to somebody who hates it, because they might be tensing up on it, and there goes all of their blood flow. They're creating more stress. It might be negative effects for doing a boatload of machine work if they absolutely hate it.
Yeah, for sure. And part of training is enjoyment in training. So if you're not enjoying training, you're probably not going to be getting better in any respects. So we'd rather you to get better in some regards than zero regards. So and that's kind of like
the perfect diet isn't the one that's on paper the best diet. It's the one that you can follow. And the same thing goes for your training.
Man, I just ate fast food all last week and I felt great. Don't take an diet advice from me. But yes, sometimes you just got to do what works. And I think that's kind of like where we've ended up in our careers is just, I mean, I had a coach since 2013 to 2019. And now I'm just kind of, I've learned enough to know what I need for the sport, and I'm just going to keep kind of rolling with that. And I think you're relatively in the same boat.
Yeah. Yep. And it's nice to be able to do this kind of an experiment, because it's who knows, it might bite me in the butt and I might not be able to front squat 95 pounds at the end of this, but who cares? I'm feeling really good and I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
Granted, I don't think that's going to happen, since I have touched some strength numbers, and I'm very happy with those occasional touches.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was another aspect I guess we forgot to add in, but like the strength component to it, like obviously with a more powerful athlete, like we can get the strength back in relatively 2 weeks, but as long as we're getting those touches on it as well, like you're gonna see relatively the same numbers across the board sustained inside of your training. So Matt's doing it once every 2 weeks. I need a little bit more than that. I probably need 2 times a week for strength touches if I'm developing like the perfect program for me. Sometimes time constraints play into that factor, but you don't need to have the breakdown of like lifting, accessory, and then conditioning piece for you to get better at the sport. It's just kind of like a smorgasbord, and you got to kind of figure out the athlete that you're working with. And part of that comes with just communication and talking to your coach as well, so they can figure you out a little bit more as an athlete. I think we had several conversations while we were working together about kind of what you were feeling inside of workouts, and then kind of ways to train around that as well. So
yeah, we did a couple unorthodox things that ended up being fantastic.
I think we took you at one point in time down to like 3 days of movement work a week, and then like 2 days of like hard work, and then you ended up was that right? Is that about what it was?
Yeah, I would do like 3 back-to-back CrossFit Metcons twice a week.
Yeah.
And I would do like 3 days of movement work. One of the movement work, like I would do like a little, like I would carry a sandbag or something just to practice heavy things. But like that's all we did leading into the open.
And then I think you had your best open placement.
Or not my best, but I think I would have gone top one. I think it was like around top 100. Yeah, with 2 days a week of CrossFit.
Yeah. So, yeah, more is more. I should say this: more CrossFit is not always better. I think there is a lot of volume that you can put in, but if you look at kind of like a volume scale, it's the intensity that matters behind it, and CrossFit is pretty intense. So like if you have like a scale of 0 to 100, 100 being an all out sprint, 0 being sleeping, and that's kind of like your intensity scale, you can put a lot of volume into the lower numbers of things. Like you can sleep 9-10 hours a night. And as you kind of move up the scale, foam rolling, movement work, lower, like strict gymnastic work where it's not going to be as damaging on your tissues. And then you kind of like in that 70 to 80 range, 90 range, you start getting into a little bit more CrossFit stuff. And so you can handle a lot of volume as long as you're putting the volume with the right intensity. And not all the time CrossFit is the right intensity.
And with that too, like it was like, and part of the reason was like, I could jack myself up with just that little bit of CrossFit touch.
Yeah.
And that's just from, with that more powerful athlete, I can dig deeper into my nervous system and I can demand a lot more. And I was like, with that pain and suffering, I was good at compensating. I was good at getting the job done. It would pay the price to hit it.
Yeah. I think you and I both kind of artificially shortened our careers with our ability to suffer. And if we had some different training protocols earlier in our development, we probably could have sustained a little bit longer.
Before I had you, I had a coach, and we like it was your classic model where you would do like some intensity lactate work on Tuesdays. And like it was pretty much every Tuesday I knew I was going to be puking because of intense intervals.
Yeah.
I got really good at suffering. I got really good at handling lactate. My gut health suffered. And just my desire for CrossFit ended up, because of that ability to suffer, hurting over time. So finding this balance now where I'm like, I don't want to suffer for the next year.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from the endurance world that are going to start being carried over into CrossFit here later on, or pretty soon here probably. I think we're starting to learn a little bit more from the endurance world. And you're going to start to see a couple more coaches like trying to follow a little bit closer to that like 80-20 rule, and like more straight just aerobic development in general. So, but we'll see what the trend says. Last year it was what was that? It was like Bodybuilding Central last year. Still like kind of hanging on for the trend, so we'll see where it goes next. But you have anything else to add, or
nothing comes to mind.
Okay, right on. Well, thanks for listening, guys. Hope this was helpful. Just kind of deep dive into some of the stuff that Matt and I are working on right now. If you guys have any questions, hit us up on Instagram, blacklisted.hq. If you guys are listening via Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We also have these on YouTube. So if you guys are listening on YouTube, you can hit us up on Instagram. Follow us on either. YouTube, we put out a couple more videos. So if you guys are looking for some more content, you can head over to YouTube. You can get some more content that way. So cool. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for jumping on this last minute, Matt. We'll probably be back to some of our other athletes here for the next podcast. So yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Ooh.